So I'm wanting to share with traditional reviews. Typically they're annual, and I'm curious how many of y'all have been part of an annual one-time review process where you do the review, you get a rating, and in that same conversation, you are shared whether or not you got a compensation or merit increase. And then when we look at 15.5 solution, it's continuous. It happens throughout the entire year. So I'll start with at the top. What is continuous year-round on a daily basis is working with your team member to help them grow and develop, to help them understand their strengths, to align their current role with their strengths. We have this product called Career Hub that allows managers and employees to collaborate with each other in there. And then on a weekly cadence, in the gray in the middle here, there's weekly check-ins that managers have with their team members. We have a regular live one-on-one, whether it's virtual or in person. There's also objectives, key results. For those of you who are familiar with the objective and key results setting methodology, it's essentially goal setting. And then there's also high fives, which is the recognition component. And so being able to give everyone a dopamine hit and saying gratitude, sharing appreciation for the impact that they've had.
Just a quick question here, Jenny. What's the difference between check-ins and one-on-ones?
Yeah, great question. Shannon, would you like to take that?
Yeah, sure. So check-ins are more tactical. So they're done typically through our product, but you could do them through email. I was at a company before who did something similar, and they sent out like a Google form that went out like once a week, and you would just fill out like, how are you feeling this week? Where are you stuck? What are you focused on? You know, all of that kind of, and it's more of the tactical conversation. So managers understand what their team is doing, where they need to be redirected. And then the one-on-one is that in-person or virtual face-to-face conversation that could be more forward-facing, more around your career growth, your development, where you need support, extra coaching, stuff like that.
Great, thanks. By the way, it would be great to collect all the data for our events attendees today. And I also can see that Tatiana is doing, like in their company, they do each and every 6 months the review cycle is. For example, Polina and Olha do that still annually. If you can like type your, like, for example, 3 months is like quarter, 6 is a number for half a year, and 12 is for yearly. So let's do the chat voting like that. Thanks.
Yeah, great to see that most folks are doing it on 6-month cadence, right? Semi-annually. Interesting, depending on seniority of the employee. So in a more junior position, every 3 months, mid-level, mid-position, 6 months, senior lead annually. Fascinating.
Interesting.
Great.
Thanks for sharing.
Yeah. All right. Thanks so much for contributing, everyone.
And one thing also here, high fives, are they connected with values? Do you like, or you can do the high five? Okay.
Very timely, Anna. I actually led a quick gratitude session on our company-wide call yesterday about reminding the best practices of a high five. It's a virtual high five, and you mention someone's name, and you write the behavior of what you observed and the impact that it had on you. And then you can actually add a hashtag of your core values. So our 4 core values are be and become your best self, cultivate relational mastery, do the extraordinary, and create customer transformation. And so it really helps people understand, okay, what are the actual behaviors that is demonstrating one of these core values? So yeah, it's really wonderful feature. Okay, Polina asks, would be great to know if you have any best practices questions for the check-ins and one-on-ones, just to have a look. Shannon, would you like to take that one?
Sure. So questions that we have in weekly, so we can do different cadences for our questions. So weekly questions are typically like, you know, what are your wins and challenges that way? And that's actually really helpful for come review time, which we'll talk about a little bit later, but we have something in our product where there's a resources for review, and anything that the individual or the manager has marked as a win or a challenge would go in that resources, so they can look back over the last 6 months or 9 months, however long, and see like where their growth has been through the challenge conversation, and also like where they have won and excelled. We also have, you know, what are your main focuses this week? So we have a section all around like that shouldn't be like a task list, but more of like, what are my main focuses, which if I accomplish these 3 or 4 things, my week would have been really successful, right? So what does that look like? And then the managers also have the ability to ask questions to their team if it's more specific. So for example, on the customer success team, we might ask, monthly, what does your workload look like? How are you able to maintain your work this month? And so that also kind of tells us, like, is the team like starting to burn out and drown? Do we need to look at like reprioritization, or are we short and we need to look at maybe hiring an additional CSM? Or is everyone have a lot of bandwidth and we can actually start working on some of these projects that have been on the back burner? So those are like more specific questions that managers could ask to their team as well. And then of course, we also have like the spot at the top, which is the, how are you feeling this week? Where people can kind of let I'm a 3 this week, which means I'm just kind of, I'm doing well. I'm doing my working my head down, or I'm a 5. I've had a great week, or I'm a 2 or a 1. Maybe that manager needs to check in with their team member and see like, what's going on with them and how can they better support them. So those are some examples of what's in the actual check-in. And then the one-on-ones, we try to keep it more future-based. Jenny and I have each other's strengths in our one-on-one. So we can like look back, and Jenny's really great at identifying like, oh, I really see your ranger strength here. I really see where you've been holding out on your relator strength lately. And so she's good at that. But the one-on-one is really focused around like, what can I do to support you? Where do you need extra attention? What are the barriers that are getting in the way of you being able to be successful at your job? So those are kind of differences between them.
Do you do the notes during the check-in one-on-ones? Yeah.
We actually have, so they're actually separate. So the check-ins are just like tactical. It's sent out weekly. And the one-on-ones, it's either person can start the one-on-one, and then you can both add agenda items. So it doesn't just have to be one person who's building it out. Both people are responsible for building out that agenda and the talking points and what you need to do. There's also sections where you can take notes together. You can have action items at the end. So if you have any action items like, oh, I really want to make sure I'm focusing on this, or I need to reach out to this person to get support, you can put those action items in to remind you to do those as well later on.
Thanks.
Absolutely.
Great. Yeah, I would say how I've always framed check-ins and one-on-ones is that the check-ins is sort of like the tactical status update, whereas the one-on-ones is more safe for the strategic problem solving together. So that's how I've often liked to frame that with my team members. And I think it also depends on the level of your direct reports, right? Because if you have a coordinator reporting to you, right, that conversation is most likely going to be a bit more tactical, right? And so it's just guiding them in terms of, how is the best way to maximize both of your time, right, in that actual one-on-one live conversation. Great. Okay, so in terms of the performance review, so what we call the performance review in 15.5 is actually the best self review. We have this methodology called best self management, which is all about having high care for the person and high care for high performance. And we believe in developing people into their best selves, meaning that they are in roles where they feel that they're thriving, that they're passionate about the work, that they're, really engaged and motivated and high performing. So that said, we call it the best self review, and we internally at 15.5 conduct it semi-annually, twice a year, once every 6 months. Typically what we do is we have a best self review where it's the self and manager review mid-year. So we just finished that cycle. And then we have a more robust cycle, the 360. So it includes the self, manager, peer, and upward review in the cycle happening in January. So we want to capture all of those perspectives.
What's upward review?
An upward review is for a manager. So all of my direct reports would review me on a set of competencies, and also adding any additional commentary to different questions that we can ask in the review. So in this most recent review cycle, as an example, we had the questions of, I don't want to butcher them, Shannon, actually, do you have them off the top of your head?
Which questions? The upward ones? Yeah.
Or the two growth and development questions.
Oh, in the review cycle. Yeah, it was, the first one was, how did this person contribute towards our H1 2022 goals, like as a company? So one thing we wanted to focus on was really making sure each person understood how the work they do actually ties into what we're trying to accomplish as a company. And so it was really focused on like, what did they accomplish in H1, the first half of the year, that contributed to the success of our goals, and how did they leverage their strengths in doing that? And then the second question was more future facing. Like, now that we know what our goals are for H2, how do you plan on contributing to the success of the company's goals for that? And how do you plan on utilizing your strengths to do so? So those were the two growth and development questions that we had this most recent time.
Thanks, Shannon. We had a great question in chat from Christina. Could you please share, how do you manage keeping high response rate each week? A lot of companies are struggling to keep consistency in responses and lacking important data as a result.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. And it's definitely something that a lot of our customers struggle with. And it's actually a data point that we use also. So if we see that response rate is starting to dip off, it actually tells us a lot about the teams. So if you're seeing a specific team that their response rate is dropping off, usually there's something going on with that team. Either they're all really starting to get burned out or overworked, or they feel stressed. Another thing is to like focus on the managers, because most of the time when individuals aren't filling out their check-ins, it's because the managers aren't reviewing them, or they're not giving good feedback within the check-in. So it's really important to make sure that you're looking at the managers, and you're showing them what the benefit of reviewing the check-ins and making sure they're providing really good feedback and responses within the check-in. And so I think focusing on the managers is going to be a much better way to get that response rate up, is because you're putting that accountability on them, and you're encouraging them to make sure that they're supporting their team in that. So I would focus on the managers first.
Shannon, do you have any benchmark? Like, for example, like 70% is like good. When it goes below it.
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on company size. We find that the larger the company gets, sometimes that percentage will dip off some. You know, the more people there are, the harder it is to corral them all. It's like trying to corral cats sometimes. So I don't know the percentage off the top of my head. I think our response rate typically hovers right around like 75 to 80%. Sometimes it'll dip down. We see sometimes a dip around review season. If they are already filling out their reviews, they're spending a lot of time doing that. And so it might dip off in those like certain specific cases. But I think it's the best way to move forward is not like if you're at 60% and you're like, we need to get to 90%. It's like, look for that incremental progress and like work with each of the managers on improving their response rate for their teams.
Okay. Yeah, the chat is awesome today. Thanks everyone for your activity. We have like a lot of slides going ahead, so let's make a pause on the questions and go back to the content, and I'll get back when we go further.
Yeah, Paulina, we will share the timeline in a future slide. I'm actually taking notes of what else to cover as Shannon and I go through. And actually, we could probably share with Anna and follow up the template that Shannon and I created for the timeline as well. So
awesome, thanks.
Yeah, happy to. We're always happy to share our templates. Last but not least, the last component of this is something that we are pretty adamant about at 15.5 is having the review conversation separate from the actual compensation conversation. There's debate about this, of whether they should be together in the same conversation or separate. We advise separate. Essentially, we do not want to correlate someone's improvement areas with, their compensation. We really want to honor the growth and development conversation, and then in follow-up a week or two later, have the actual compensation decision. And that's in the event if you do tie your compensation with a performance. Historically, 15.5 actually advised customer not to tie compensation, performance to compensation decisions, but we've actually shifted that across the past year. We do believe that it is important for organizations to essentially include performance as a component to compensation decisions. Other components that lead into comp decisions include what's the budget? What does the talent market look like? What do the market benchmarks look like? What's your compensation philosophy? And so there's a lot of different factors going into compensation alongside performance. So I just wanted to quickly touch on that.
Yeah, and I think it's important when we're talking about separating pay from conversation. A large reason we want to do this also is when people hear like a money amount or that becomes, they stop listening to the growth and development part of it. It's just natural, right? So you really want to have that conversation, have them understand like where they can grow and develop, what's next steps for them, all of that, have that conversation first. And then it also makes them feel like they were a part of that conversation before the money decision was made, right? So it's less like when it's at the same time, they feel like, well, I didn't get any input. I didn't get any say in this conversation. You're just giving me whatever you think. And I didn't have a good, representation in that conversation. So that's just kind of another part of it.